Hey everyone, Tactics here with video 4 of my Advanced Tormented Routing series going into Halls of Atonement. If you're interested in my other videos, you can find them linked down below or over on my channel, and be sure to subscribe to be notified when the remaining ones get posted. I also have a video going over some more simple, easy to execute Tormented routes that are great if you're pugging a lot, if you're just aiming to get KSM. So if that sounds like you, I would definitely recommend checking that video out. Unlike that simple routes video, this is going to be a lot less restrictive, leaving room for plenty of skips, complex and coordinated pulls, preference to certain classes or specs, and in general will just be a whole lot harder to accomplish, but something that you may see higher key pushing groups actually doing. For those interested, I'll also be posting the Mythic Dungeon Tool route down in the description so you can import it and use it for yourself. With that said, if you learned something in this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to be notified when I post more Mythic Plus content, and let's get started. So right off the bat, Halls is a fairly short timer dungeon, and it's very hard to squeak in that 4th lust in this dungeon, and so in general, you're pretty much planning for 3. So right off the top, we do actually send one fairly quickly because, again, you have to kill all 3 of these shards to even activate the first boss, and that's a ton of trash percent you're going to be doing regardless of what your route is before the first boss. And so getting this first lust on cooldown ASAP is just in general a very good idea. So we send that on this pull here. This pull can be a little tricky to group up. We tend to do is we don't move on spawn, because then these 2 guys here will not run forward. They'll stay way back here and they'll run up when you run up, making them a little easier to group. We run through and we stand on top of these 2 here. We have a knockback to push this Houndmaster into the pack, and then we have a ranged kick bringing in this Obliterator from this pack, and we group that up, lust, nuke it down. Overall, relatively safe as long as people are getting kicks, especially now that Wicked Bolts are a lot harder hitting on your tank. You want to make sure you're kicking those, dispelling curses, making sure that the Houndmaster doesn't get the big cast off, and then of course just watching those frontal cleaves. But in general, this pull is actually one of the less scarier pulls. It's even possible we might add more to this in the future. I know there's actually a pull variation where you do something like this instead as your first pull. Something like this. Oops. We'll yellow it all. There we go. Something like this as your first pull, which is definitely a lot scarier, but also a lot more percent efficient, right? Doing that shard with Bloodlust, very good. You free up this LOS spot here, which I'll talk about later. But this is definitely a variation that you may see us doing in the future, and something that I think is probably the best time save in this dungeon, because it can get pretty tight. But for now, at least, we're doing the other variation, keeping this a little safer off the top, and just doing this stuff here together. From there, we do go up north here, because this is either going to be Arcolith or, in the other rotation, Varuth. So this is another one of those dungeons where your route pretty much doesn't change at all, because the 2 guys you want to focus on getting quickly in Arcolith and Varuth are tied to each other on the rotation, so they'll just swap back and forth. Whereas Oros and Sagadon, the 2 that you don't really care about at all, will swap back and forth. So really, there's no kind of positional advantage when the rotation happens. So you're just mostly going with the same route. In this one, we kind of hug by left here. Another decently sized pull here. This will have an Incarn on it, which is why we do fairly big pulls back to back. This has the pre-Incarn and Bloodlust. This has the full Incarn. And then we go into the shard here and then do the Arcolith or Varuth Lieutenant, whoever is there, to get that big power before going into the rest of the shard stuff. We do go back to back, so shard, then the Lieutenant, then the next shard over here in this specific route. Like I said, if you're doing that big pull off the top that kills this shard, that's one less thing you need to worry about. But in this situation, we are going and killing that shard, and we're actually skipping Oros here. So skipping Lieutenants in this dungeon, again, it's a little tight on higher key levels to time this dungeon, and we actually found that it's fairly safe to skip both Oros and Sagadon in this dungeon. Sagadon, of course, the only thing he amps on the last boss, aside from his attacks on the tank, are his the statue throw ability. So in a situation where you're doing tyrannical keys and that statue throw is already lethal if you get hit by it, then it doing 50% more damage doesn't mean anything, right? It's basically a non-affix. Oros, on the other hand, of course, makes it much harder to dodge those statues. So realistically, you can pretty much always skip Sogadon, no matter what. Doesn't affect it at all. Oros is the one you may be like, okay, are we on top of our game? Are we going into this last boss maybe with a couple battle reses? And are we able to just keep an eye on those statues at all times and instantly strafe in the correct direction to not get murdered by it? We actually found that it wasn't too bad with Oros. And so I think for the most part, to save time, we're probably going to be skipping both Oros and Sogadon in this dungeon. And that's just a big time save whenever you can do that. Their powers, again, aren't great. Sogadon powers, again, the shield is very, very strong in general. But if we look at the specifics of this dungeon, especially because how late you can get it. You can get it right here, but you could also get it super late and have him like really, really like right before the third boss, right? So assuming we even get him here, though, like what's the value in having Sogadon, right? What are you going to die to? The only thing I think you'd ever die to is second boss stuff. And compared to a dungeon like Sanguine Depths, where there's a ton of lethal or ticking or big damage going out on your group, or a dungeon like Plaguefall, same idea. There's a ton of like random damage or lethal damage going out on your entire party, and the Stoneward gets a ton of value in those kinds of dungeons. This dungeon is not like that. Like I said, the main thing Stoneward would be good for is if you screw up on the last boss and you get hit by a statue. But even then, on high tyrannical keys, that may just be dead through the Stoneward, right? So in general, it's in this dungeon not very high value and perfectly fine to skip. And like I said, he adds almost nothing to the last boss anyways. And so it's just time saved by ignoring him here. Back to the route itself, though. So let's talk gargoyles for a second here. The loyal Stoneborns, which I'm going to assume you have because Venthyr is insane in this dungeon. So what we do is we line one up with all of the shard packs, because the shard packs can get very, very scary. So we bring this Stoneborn into this shard pack, this Stoneborn down here into this shard pack, this Stoneborn goes into this shard pack, and then we do this Stoneborn and this Stoneborn into the first boss. And then depending on padding walking through, you can pull this Stoneborn into the third boss. So that one is a bit more up in the air, though, because you have to watch this Stoneborn Slasher pad, and of course the Stoneborn Slasher's activation here. So this one needs to be the inactive one, and this Slasher needs to be on either end of its pat, and then you can just tag this and walk it up the stairs. That works, but again, if your timing is just wrong, right, you're shrouding through or you're invis-potting through, like I'll talk about in a second here, and this guy is not active, if this guy is active, or this is just in a bad pat spot, I wouldn't sit here and wait the 20 to 30 seconds to line it up right. If it's not in the cards, it's not in the cards, and I would just go into the boss there. Now, in terms of these other pulls, let's talk about these shards. They are very, very, very dangerous. So the range on them was drastically increased in Season 2. Their damage was slightly decreased to compensate, but in general, on higher fortified keys in particular, they're going to be quite dangerous, and the key here is going to be LOS. So anytime you can LOS these guys feasibly during the thrash is going to make the pulls so much easier, and those spots exist in a couple of places. So you've got a spot here, and you've got a spot here. Be careful with this one. You can jump right off the edge. I've seen it happen. You know who you are. But yeah, so there is an edge right there, but you can LOS. This shard, there's an LOS spot right here. And that's why you pull this up together. It opens up that LOS spot for your party to run around for the thrash. Very, very good. This one, not so lucky. You're just going to have to kind of burn through it and use defensives if needed. Commit a lot to it. You do have that Stoneborn, of course, but you have a Stoneborn for all of them. So this one is probably going to be the scariest shard in general, but we make sure we have CDs for it, so it becomes a lot safer in that sense because we've pre-planned. After killing all 3 shards, we make sure to clear this trash here and this trash here to give us space for the boss, especially if you're skipping this lieutenant. You're going to need a decent amount of space here, so you can bring the boss this way, like across this way, back down this way, and then across this way if it's like a long tyrannical fight or whatever it is, just so you're not pulling this lieutenant by accident. And as a note, because I've seen people ask, to pull this Stoneborn down for this first boss, you need to go into this gated off area where these two guys are located, and there's like a tree or a wall you can hit, like hug right there, and you'll be able to tag it at 40 yards is all you need. So you don't need extra long arms or anything. 40 yards is long enough to tag this Stoneborn, and it'll just run down. And these guys aren't active yet, so you will just get the Stoneborn. So that's a nice little trick you can do there. And to pull 2 Stoneborns at once, what we do is actually you have to make sure that they're stacked. And then any Venthyr player, once these 2 Stoneborns are stacked, can just spam their button. And if you keep spamming it, you will be able to tame both of them at the same time. So you can do that with 1 Venthyr player. You could do that at the same time with 2 different Venthyr players. Doesn't really matter. Either way, you can just have these 2 Stoneborns for this boss, which make it a lot better on Tyrannical Week, because we actually do not lust this boss on Tyrannical Week. Or Fortified Week, where you probably will want to lust this boss because we'll need lust for a specific time later on. So yeah, as I mentioned, this boss not terribly difficult on Tyrannical Week, but differing from the Necrotic Root strategy, where you're trying to make the pulls easier because the timer is a lot more forgiving, in Halls of Atonement, the timer is not forgiving. The timer on higher key levels is extremely punishing, so you need to try and make any time-saving moves that you can, and especially on Tyrannical Weeks, when the bosses have just a ton of health. You may even want to be lusting this guy at that point, even though this second boss is clearly just the most dangerous boss in the dungeon, in my opinion. For the sake of time, you may just have to send lust earlier to be able to do a time save on high tyrannical keys later on, which I'll talk about in a second here. On Fortified Weeks, though, we always send lust on this guy. We burn him down real quick, and then once this boss is done, we shroud across, or if you need to invis-potting here is fine, and you are going straight into the second boss. This boss is pretty spooky, especially if your group is lacking curse dispels. We actually have 2 curse dispels in our group, so we have 1 person assigned to always get our healer, and then 1 person assigned to always get the person actually marked with the jump debuff. And that means that those people are free to move, they don't get stunned, and when the jump actually goes off, the person targeted is able to use some sort of dash ability to completely avoid the damage. So that's a huge damage taken decrease on this fight, and that's one of the main things of like using lust not on this boss, is if you're able to do that, right, you have a couple curse spells, you're able to get rid of a ton of the danger in this fight. Now on Tyrannical Weeks up to a certain level, I'd say you might want to lust this guy instead of the first boss, just because you're in so much more danger on this boss in general. But as we get into higher and higher tyrannical keys, you're going to need lust up to do the mini boss skip right before the last boss. And lusting on this boss means that it's not going to be up in time. So you're going to have to send that lust on Halkias just so it's up for the mini boss skip, which I'll talk about here when we get to that guy. This boss, though, again, the only real thing which is those curses, but aside from that, maybe just delaying attacks on those imps for a tad bit so they come in and they group up a lot better. That can help a lot with that, and then just kicks on anyone standing super far outside the stack. Going inside, we have the next Lieutenant, Varuth, or Incinerator. So it's a pretty long time. What percent? It's 81% of the dungeon before you get your second power. This is one of those dungeons where I wasn't too happy with the positioning of these guys compared to some of the other dungeons, right? I think this one and Spires are the 2 biggest outliers if you look at Lieutenant positioning in the dungeon, but hey, it is what it is. Nothing too crazy in here. Again, we're skipping Soggodon. You can just walk up to the right side here. You'll be able to walk through without pulling a Stoneborn, without pulling Soggodon. If you just walk through the right path, it can be a little scary. If you shrouded earlier to get up here, you can shroud again just for safety, but it's not necessary at all. And then you're going into the third boss here. Now on Fortified Weeks, no gargoyles here. Do not use these Stoneborns. You will need them for the mini-boss skip. On Tyrannical Weeks, I think there's an argument to be made that you bring 1 in, because this boss fight will last so long on tyrannical weeks, right? We're to the point where you could probably commit 2 minutes twice on this boss and still have them up for the mini boss burn. But in general, I would say gargoyles on this boss are not necessary. The boss is very, very easy, very low damage in general if you're getting kicks, and really all you're worried about here is time and not wasting too much time on this boss while still having all of your cooldown up by the time you kill this boss, because you will need all of your cooldowns to burn this mini boss and save by far the most time in the dungeon. If your group has good single target, this is going to be by far your biggest time save. So basically, on fortified weeks, like I said, we would have lust for this. You would double tame these stoneborns up here, and then run through, tag the mini boss. Your whole raid stands in this area here, or party, sorry. You wait for him to finish his first channel, you pop lust, and you have 30 seconds to kill him before he heals back to full health. So that is the play there. Triple necrotic makes it a little interesting. He won't heal all the way back to full health, but still it's a little rough. But this is totally doable on high fortified, depending on team comp, and definitely 100% doable on high tyrannical as well. You may or may not need to commit that bloodlust. Like I said, that fully depends on what your team comp is. If you have a ton of single target damage, maybe you don't need to commit that lust, and you're able to instead lust the more dangerous second boss and then the last boss as well. Maybe your single target is kind of mediocre, so instead you're forced to lust this first boss here so that you have lust up for the mini boss himself, and that lets you get through that burn, because this is going to be a huge time save if you don't have to worry about killing everything in this room and then the mini boss. So it really just depends on group comp here. So our group comp, great single target damage. We're able to kind of pump this guy no matter the week and just get him down ASAP. Sometimes the higher we go, the more likely it is we have to commit lust to this on a tyrannical week. We have been actually able to, on tyrannical week, do this with just one stoneborn and no bloodlust. But the higher you go, like I said, the more likely it is you're going to have to commit more of those stoneborns, more of that bloodlust, and make sure again you have time so all of your cooldowns are up. What we do on fortified weeks is that you get one use of 2 minutes. 1 minute classes get 2 uses, maybe 3 uses of their 1 minute, depending on what boss percentage is at by the time that third usage comes up. But 2 minutes, you only get 1 use on this boss, and then we go straight into the mini boss to make sure everything is up. On tyrannical weeks, like I said, 2 minutes may get 2 uses on this fight. You get to use 3 minutes if you have those. 1 minute to get to send a ton of times, right? So it's just kind of play it by ear, depend on your team comp in this last area of the dungeon, but that's kind of how we handle it with our group, which is made up of currently an arcane mage, a sub rogue, an arms or fury warrior, guardian druid, and a priest healer. Going into the last boss, like I said, we do play this with Oros and Sagadon. The extra physical damage only affects those statues, so you just 100% make sure you're dodging those statues, and it gets harder with Oros, so that's kind of a thing you're going to have to see. Are we comfortable running Oros on this last boss? Are we comfortable dodging those statues, etc., etc.? So that's really going to be, again, kind of up to your group comp. Obviously, if you have access to a lot of blinks or mobility or Night Fate, things like that, it makes that decision a lot easier. But we do choose to do this with a non-Night Fate priest, and he has been able to manage, surprisingly. It's actually been not too bad if we look at fights that Oros kind of affects out of all the dungeons. But I think that does just about wrap up this advanced routing video for Halls of Atonement. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it. If you have any questions regarding the route we used, the dungeon itself, or even just Mythic Plus or tanking in general, feel free to leave a comment below, or you can come check out my Twitch channel at Tactics and ask me there, and I'll do my best to answer. That's all for now, though. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.